You wake to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window pane. The air is heavy, damp with the scent of wood smoke and soil. Somewhere outside a rooster calls. And for a moment the world feels calm. The kind of grey morning where life moves slowly, where the day has not yet decided what it will become. The year is 1860. The country you call home is still whole, at least on paper. But beneath the calm surface, you can feel the tremor of something vast and unstoppable approaching, a storm that will soon sweep across every field, every town, every heart. You step outside. The road before you is muddy, lined with bare trees. A horse-drawn carriage passes in the distance, wheels creaking over ruts, its driver glancing toward you, nodding politely, unaware that both of you stand at the edge of a world about to disappear. In the distance, a church bell rings deep and resonant. It's a familiar sound, yet tonight it feels different, heavier somehow, like an omen. Newspapers talk of secession, of speeches in the South, of votes and protests and words that sting sharper than any blade. Men argue in taverns. Families at dinner tables fall into uneasy silence. The air itself seems to hold its breath. You can almost sense it now, a slow unraveling, thread by thread. The Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott decision, all those distant political storms have gathered into one vast thunderhead overhead. The question of slavery, once whispered behind closed doors, now stands at the center of everything. And soon the first cannon will fire at a lonely fort in Charleston Harbor, and that echo will carry across the continent, changing everything it touches. But tonight, in this quiet moment before the storm, we will walk together through the years that led to that sound, through the hopes and fears, the courage and cruelty, the ordinary lives swept up in extraordinary times. So settle in now. Let your shoulders drop. Let the soft rhythm of the rain steady your breath. The fire is low, the world is still, and history, restless as ever, is about to awaken. Part 1. The Seeds of Division. Let us walk back through time gently, slowly, like turning pages in an old book whose spine has softened with age. The year is 1820, and already the question has begun to gnaw at the heart of the young republic. As new territories stretch westward across the vast continent, each one brings the same troubling question: will it be slave or free? The Missouri Compromise arrives like a temporary truce. Missouri enters the Union as a slave state, Maine as free, and an invisible line is drawn across the map at the 36° 30 parallel. Slavery permitted below, prohibited above. It is a solution built on sand, holding back an ocean. You can imagine the politicians in their chambers, candlelight flickering across worried faces, their quills scratching across parchment as they search for words that might hold a fracturing nation together just a little longer. Outside, the gas lamps glow soft in the evening mist. Somewhere, a door closes. Somewhere else, a family sits at dinner, unaware that their children's children will live in a world shaped by this single compromise. The years pass like autumn leaves, falling one by one. 1821, 1822, 1823. Time moves forward, and with it the nation grows. New states, new territories, new questions. But the old answer, the compromise, begins to show its cracks. By 1850, the tension has tightened like a rope about to snap. California seeks admission to the Union, and with it comes another crisis. The Compromise of 1850 emerges from months of heated debate. California enters as a free state, but the Fugitive Slave Act is strengthened, requiring citizens even in free states to assist in the capture and return of escaped slaves. Picture a cold morning in a northern town. Frost covers the cobblestones. A family of fugitives, having travelled by night along the Underground Railroad, huddles in a barn, their breath visible in the frigid air. They are so close to freedom, they can taste it. But now, the law itself has become their enemy. Even here, in what they believed was sanctuary, they are hunted. This law changes something fundamental in the national conscience. It forces ordinary people, shopkeepers, farmers, clergy, to become complicit in slavery's machinery. Some comply, others resist, hiding families in root cellars and attics, guiding them further north toward Canada's border. The nation's moral divide becomes impossible to ignore. The years continue their quiet march. 1851, 1852, 1853. Then comes 1854, and with it the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This new law tears apart the old Missouri Compromise, declaring that territories can decide for themselves whether to allow slavery through popular sovereignty. Let the people vote. It sounds democratic in theory. In practice, it ignites a powder keg. Kansas becomes a battlefield before it is even a state. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rush into the territory, each side determined to win the vote. Towns spring up overnight, rough wooden buildings, dirt streets, tension thick as the summer heat. You can see them gathering. Farmers with weathered hands, merchants with ink-stained fingers, preachers clutching worn Bibles. They've come to build something new, but they've brought the old conflicts with them, packed carefully alongside their tools and dreams. Soon the violence begins. What history will remember as bleeding Kansas unfolds across the prairie. Raids in the night, gunfire echoing across wheat fields. The town of Lawrence burns, smoke rising into an indifferent sky. John Brown, zealous, righteous, uncompromising, leads his own violent crusade against slavery, leaving death in his wake. The violence in Kansas is not the grand, organized warfare that will come later. It is intimate and chaotic, neighbors turning on neighbors, idealism curdling into brutality. It is a preview of the greater storm gathering on the horizon. Breathe slowly now. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress. Let these images wash over you gently, like distant memories from another life. Part 2. The Final Fractures. The year 1857 brings another blow to the fragile peace. The Supreme Court delivers its decision in the case of Dred Scott, an enslaved man who sued for his freedom after living in free territory. Chief Justice Roger Taney writes the majority opinion, and his words cut deep into the nation's conscience. African Americans, he declares, whether enslaved or free, cannot be citizens. Congress has no power to prohibit slavery in the territories. The Missouri Compromise itself had been unconstitutional. In one sweeping decision, the court seems to close every legal door to slavery's restriction. The decision electrifies the North, outraging those who had hoped the courts might chart a path toward gradual emancipation. In the South, many celebrate, seeing their institutions validated by the highest law of the land. You can picture Dred Scott himself, a man in his 60s by now, his hair greying, his hope for freedom dashed by 9 judges in black robes. He will eventually gain his freedom through other means, but he will die within a year, his name forever attached to a decision that helped push the nation toward war. The late 1850s pass in an atmosphere of increasing dread. The nation seems to split, not just politically but spiritually, culturally, into two Americas that no longer speak the same language or share the same dreams. Then comes October 1859, and John Brown returns to the national stage for his final fatal performance. He gathers a small band of followers, 21 men, including several of his own sons, and they attack the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan? To seize weapons and inspire a slave uprising across the South. The raid fails quickly. Robert E. Lee, then a colonel in the U.S. Army, leads the Marines who storm the arsenal. Brown is captured, wounded, defiant. His trial becomes a national spectacle. He shows no remorse, speaks of divine justice and moral duty. The South sees him as a terrorist, a murderer, proof of northern extremism. The North is divided. Some denounce his violence, others see a martyr willing to die for a righteous cause. On December 2nd, 1859, John Brown is hanged. Church bells toll across northern cities. Ralph Waldo Emerson compares him to Christ. Southern newspapers call for vigilance against northern aggression. The chasm widens. 1 year later, in November 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected President of the United States. Lincoln carries not a single southern state. His name does not even appear on the ballot in most of them. He wins with less than 40% of the popular vote, but the Electoral College gives him victory. The South hears in his election a death sentence for their way of life. Though Lincoln has pledged not to interfere with slavery where it already exists, his opposition to its expansion is clear. Southern leaders see the writing on the wall. The North has grown faster, industrialized more rapidly, gained more seats in Congress. If slavery cannot expand, they believe, it will eventually suffocate and die. Picture a plantation house in South Carolina on the night of Lincoln's election. Candles burn low in silver holders. A man reads the telegraph reports, his face growing stern. Outside, the November wind stirs the Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks. His wife asks what the news means. He folds the paper slowly. It means, he says quietly, that everything is about to change. Part 3. The Nation Fractures. December 20, 1860 to 1800. South Carolina secedes from the Union. The vote is unanimous. 169 delegates, not a single dissenting voice. The convention hall in Charleston erupts in celebration. Palmetto flags wave, bands play. People dance in the streets, as if independence has already been won. But listen carefully, and beneath the celebration you can hear something else, the sound of a great tearing, like fabric ripping along an old seam. Mississippi follows in January, then Florida, then Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. By February 1861, 7 states have left the Union. They meet in Montgomery, Alabama, and form the Confederate States of America. They draft a constitution. They elect Jefferson Davis as their president. In Washington, the outgoing President James Buchanan wrings his hands, declaring secession illegal, but claiming he has no power to stop it. The Union, for now, does nothing. The question hangs in the cold winter air. Will they let the South go peacefully, or will they fight to preserve the Union? Lincoln will not be inaugurated until March 4, 1861. The winter between election and inauguration stretches long and uncertain. Senators give farewell speeches. Friendships forged over decades dissolve overnight. Officers in the U.S. Army resign their commissions to return south, torn between loyalty to nation and loyalty to home. Picture a officer's quarters at a frontier fort. A man sits at his desk, a letter half written before him. He has served the United States for 20 years, fought in Mexico, earned his rank through dedication and courage. But he is from Virginia, and Virginia is his home. The pen trembles in his hand. How does one choose between country and birthplace? How does one write the words, "I resign"? These are the quiet tragedies, the personal fractures that mirror the national one. Family split, brothers who will soon face each other across battlefields. Friendships ended in bitter argument. The social fabric of the nation, woven over decades, unravels thread by thread. March 4, 1861. Abraham Lincoln stands before the Capitol, still under construction, its dome incomplete, and delivers his first inaugural address. His words are conciliatory but firm. He has no intention to interfere with slavery in the states where it exists. But the Union is perpetual, unbreakable. No state has the right to leave. We are not enemies but friends, he says. We must not be enemies. But in Charleston Harbor, at a small fort on an artificial island, the situation has already moved beyond words. Major Robert Anderson commands a small garrison at Fort Sumter, fewer than 80 men in a fort designed for hundreds. They are surrounded by Confederate forces. Supplies are running low. The situation is untenable. Lincoln faces an impossible choice: resupply the fort and risk war, abandon it and signal that the Union will not defend itself. He chooses a middle path, sending supply ships with food and medicine, but no weapons or reinforcements. The Confederate government in Montgomery sees this as a provocation. They cannot allow a foreign power, for that is what they consider the United States now, to maintain a military presence in one of their principal harbours. On April 11, 1861, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard demands Anderson's surrender. Anderson refuses, though he notes that lack of supplies will force evacuation within days. It is not enough. The order is given. At 4:30 in the morning on April 12, 1861, the first shell arcs through the pre-dawn darkness and explodes above Fort Sumter. Picture that moment. The harbour is still dark, the water calm. Stars fade in the east, where morning will soon break. Then suddenly, a flash, a boom, a streak of fire against the sky. Then another, and another. Inside the fort, men scramble from their bunks. Brick dust falls from the ceiling as shells impact the walls. The bombardment will continue for 33 hours. Thousands of shells will be fired. Miraculously, no one inside the fort will die from the bombardment itself. Major Anderson and his men return fire when they can, but their situation is hopeless. The fort was never meant to withstand a siege from the land. Fires break out. Ammunition runs low. The heat inside becomes unbearable as flames consume the wooden barracks. On April 13th, Anderson surrenders. He and his men are allowed to leave with full honours, marching out with flags floating, drums beating. As they prepare to evacuate, Anderson is permitted to fire a final salute to the flag he has defended. During this ceremony, a cannon misfires, killing Private Daniel Huff, the first casualty of the Civil War, killed not in combat but in tribute. The garrison boards ships and sails north. Behind them, the Confederate flag rises over Fort Sumter. The news spreads like wildfire. Telegraph wires carry it north and south, east and west. In New York, crowds gather in the streets. In Richmond, men cheer. The war that everyone feared and no one quite believed would happen has finally begun. Lincoln issues a call for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. The response is immediate and overwhelming. In the North, young men rush to enlist, afraid the war will end before they can see action. But Lincoln's call for troops forces the hand of the Upper South. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas have remained in the Union despite the earlier secessions. Now asked to provide troops to fight against their southern neighbours, they refuse. Within weeks, all 4 states join the Confederacy. Virginia's decision is perhaps the most significant. The Old Dominion, mother of presidents, largest and wealthiest of the southern states. Its choice to secede ensures that the Confederate capital will move from Montgomery to Richmond, less than 100 miles from Washington, D.C. The two capitals will spend the next 4 years staring at each other across that narrow strip of Virginia countryside, and that contested ground will become the war's bloodiest theatre. Part 3. The Innocence of Beginnings. In the spring and summer of 1861, the war feels almost like a grand adventure. Both sides are certain of quick victory. The South believes one good battle will convince the North that conquest is impossible. The North believes the rebellion will collapse once faced with the Union's superior numbers and resources. Young men on both sides enlist with enthusiasm. They pose for photographs in their new uniforms, stiff, formal, their faces serious, but their eyes bright with anticipation. They drill in town squares while crowds gather to watch. Bands play patriotic songs. Women sew flags and prepare banners. The mood is festive, almost carnival-like. "We'll be home by Christmas," they tell their mothers and sweethearts. They have no idea what is coming. The armies that gather in the summer of 1861 are, in many ways, amateurs. Most soldiers have never fired a rifle in anger. Officers have read about tactics in books, but never applied them in practice. Logistics, the unglamorous work of feeding, clothing, and moving thousands of men, is barely understood. In Washington, General Winfield Scott, hero of the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War, now elderly and infirm, proposes a strategy: blockade southern ports, control the Mississippi River, squeeze the Confederacy slowly, like an anaconda constricting its prey. It's a sound strategy, but it requires patience. The Northern public wants action. On to Richmond, the newspapers cry. Political pressure mounts. Lincoln needs a victory to prove the rebellion can be crushed. On July 21st, 1861, the armies meet near a creek called Bull Run, outside the town of Manassas, Virginia. Picture that summer morning. The air is already warm, heavy with humidity. Dust rises from thousands of feet, marching along dirt roads. The Union Army under General Irvin McDowell moves south from Washington. They are inexperienced, barely trained, but they outnumber the Confederate forces. Civilians follow the army in carriages, bringing picnic baskets. Congressmen and their wives, society ladies with parasols. They come to watch the battle as if it were a sporting event. They spread blankets on hillsides, uncork wine bottles, and wait for the spectacle to begin. The battle begins early, confused, chaotic. Units move through woods and over farmland. Soldiers fire at shapes glimpsed through smoke. The sound of musketry crackles like distant fireworks. Artillery booms, the concussion rolling across the fields. For hours, it seems the Union might win. Confederate lines bend. Soldiers fall back. Then, on a ridge called Henry House Hill, a Virginia brigade under Thomas Jackson holds firm. Another Confederate general trying to rally his own troops shouts, "There's Jackson standing like a stone wall." The nickname sticks. Thomas Stonewall Jackson will become one of the war's legendary figures. As afternoon comes, Confederate reinforcements arrive by train, one of the first times in history that railroads play a crucial role in moving troops to battle. The tide turns. The Union line wavers, then breaks. What begins as an orderly retreat becomes a rout. Exhausted, frightened soldiers flee back toward Washington. They throw away their rifles and equipment, desperate to escape. The civilians on their hillsides find themselves caught in the chaos, their carriages blocking the roads as panicked soldiers stream past. By evening, Washington is in near panic. Rumors spread that Confederate cavalry is about to charge into the city. The guards are doubled. Lincoln stays up all night, reading dispatches, his long face drawn with worry. But the Confederate army, equally exhausted and disorganized, does not pursue. They have won the battle, but they lack the strength to exploit the victory. Both sides learn a hard lesson at Bull Run. This will not be a short war. This will not be settled by parades and enthusiasm. Real war is confusion and terror and blood. It is men crying for their mothers as they lie wounded in summer grass. It is smoke so thick you cannot see 10 feet ahead. It is the peculiar smell of gunpowder mixed with sweat and fear. The photographs of soldiers taken after Bull Run show different faces than those taken before. The brightness is gone from their eyes. They have seen something they cannot unsee. Close your eyes now. Feel yourself sinking deeper into rest. The images soften like paintings viewed from increasing distance. The story continues, but you can hear it from the edge of sleep where history becomes dream. Part 4. The long, grinding war begins. After Bull Run, both sides settle in for a longer, harder struggle. The initial enthusiasm tempers into grim determination. The camps that spring up around Washington and Richmond become small cities, vast fields of white canvas tents stretching to the horizon. Life in these camps follows a routine that is both monotonous and uncomfortable. Soldiers wake at dawn to the sound of drums. They drill for hours, under the sun. They eat hardtack and salt pork, coffee, if they're lucky. They write letters home by candlelight, trying to explain what this strange new life is like. Disease becomes the great killer. For every soldier who dies in battle, 2 die from disease. Typhoid, dysentery, measles, pneumonia. The medical knowledge of 1861 does not yet understand germs. Surgeons operate with unwashed hands. Camps are built near stagnant water. Soldiers share drinking cups and blankets. Illness spreads like wildfire through densely packed regiments. Field hospitals are nightmares of suffering. Wounded men lie on straw, waiting for treatment. Surgeons work by lamplight, sawing off shattered limbs because they lack the knowledge to save them. The piles of amputated arms and legs outside the surgery tents become a gruesome symbol of the war's cost. Yet, there are moments of strange beauty too. A soldier stands guard on a quiet night, watching the stars wheel overhead, and feels simultaneously tiny and infinite. Men gather around campfires, singing songs from home. Letters arrive from sweethearts, and the words are read and reread until the paper wears thin. In the winter of 1861 to 1862, both armies essentially hibernate. The roads become impassable mud. Combat is impossible. Soldiers huddle in crude log huts, burning fence rails to stay warm, wrapped in whatever blankets they can find. Meanwhile, in Washington, Lincoln struggles to find a general who can win battles. He appoints George B. McClellan to command the Army of the Potomac. McClellan is brilliant at organization. He turns the mob that fled from Bull Run into a real army, well-trained and well-equipped. But he is overly cautious, always convinced the enemy outnumbers him, reluctant to fight unless conditions are perfect. In the West, however, a different kind of general is emerging. Ulysses S. Grant, rumpled, quiet, often underestimated, begins to show a talent for war. In February 1862, he captures Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee, taking thousands of Confederate prisoners. When the Confederate commander asks for terms of surrender, Grant's reply is simple. No terms except immediate and unconditional surrender can be accepted. The North Star for good news has a new hero. Grant, they call him. But the war is about to enter a new, bloodier phase. 1862. Near a small church called Shiloh in southern Tennessee, Grant's army camps along the Tennessee River. They are waiting for reinforcements, confident the Confederates are far away. They are wrong. At dawn, Confederate forces under Albert Sidney Johnston launch a massive surprise attack. The Union camps erupt in chaos. Men stumble from their tents, barely dressed, grabbing their rifles as rebel soldiers come screaming out of the woods. Picture the confusion. The morning is soft with fog. Then suddenly, gunfire shouting, the high-pitched rebel yell piercing the air. Tents collapse. Cooking fires scatter. Men run in all directions, some toward the fight, some away from it. The Confederates drive the Union forces back, mile after mile. Unit cohesion breaks down. The battle becomes 1,000 small fights in thickets and ravines. The peach orchard blooms with pink blossoms, and men die beneath those petals. A place called the Hornet's Nest becomes a killing ground, where Union soldiers hold out for hours against repeated assaults. General Johnston himself is killed in the afternoon, bleeding to death from a leg wound that might have been easily treated if he had allowed his personal physician to attend to it. His loss devastates Confederate morale. As night falls, Grant's army is pressed back to the river. It seems another Union disaster is unfolding. But that night, reinforcements arrive. Fresh troops cross the river under cover of darkness. Grant, meeting with his subordinate William Tecumseh Sherman, lights a cigar and says simply, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Sherman nods. "Yes, lick 'em tomorrow, though." And they do. On April 7th, the Union counterattacks and the exhausted Confederates fall back. The battle ends in a tactical draw, but strategically, the Union has held. The Confederate invasion of Tennessee has failed. The casualties shock both sides. Nearly 24,000 men killed, wounded or missing in 2 days. More casualties than all previous American wars combined. The carnage is unimaginable. Wounded men lying in the rain calling for water, for help for their mothers. The field hospitals are overwhelmed. Surgeons work until they collapse. The dead are buried in mass graves, their names often unknown. After Shiloh, no one speaks anymore of quick victory or easy war. Both sides understand now that this will be a fight to the finish, paid for in blood and suffering on a scale America has never known. Let the darkness around you deepen now. Let these heavy truths settle like snow falling on a winter field, cold but clean, covering everything in quiet white. You are safe here in this moment, while history's ghosts whisper their stories from the shadows. While the great armies clash on land, another struggle unfolds on America's rivers and coastal waters. The Union's Anaconda Plan begins to tighten its coils. Union warships blockade southern ports, cutting off the Confederacy's ability to export cotton and import weapons and supplies from Europe. It is tedious, dangerous work. Ships patrol endlessly through storms and heat, watching for blockade runners trying to slip through under cover of darkness. The Confederate Navy responds with innovation, born of desperation. They raise the burned hulk of the USS Merrimac, cover it with iron plates, rename it the CSS Virginia, and send it to break the blockade. On March 8, 1862, the Virginia steams into Hampton Roads. Cannonballs bounce harmlessly off its sloped iron sides. It rams and sinks the USS Cumberland, kills 120 men. It forces the USS Congress to surrender, then destroys it with hot shot. In a single day, wooden warships become obsolete, but the Union has its own ironclad. The next day, the USS Monitor arrives, a strange vessel, low in the water, with a rotating turret that looks like a cheese box on a raft. The two ironclads meet in battle. For hours they circle and fire, neither able to seriously damage the other. The Battle of Hampton Roads ends in a draw, but it revolutionizes naval warfare worldwide. The age of wooden warships is over. On the Mississippi River, Union forces push slowly south. David Farragut, a Tennessean who remained loyal to the Union, commands a fleet that forces its way past Confederate forts and captures New Orleans in April 1862. The Confederacy's largest city, its greatest port, falls without a major battle. Picture that moment. Union sailors standing on the decks of their ships, staring up at the city's wharves and buildings. The mighty Mississippi, that artery of commerce and culture, is slowly being brought under Union control. The Confederacy is being cut in two. Railroads, too, become strategic prizes. The war is the first in history where railroads play a crucial role. Troops and supplies can move, in days what would have taken weeks by marching. Cities with rail connections become vital. Armies maneuver to control tracks and stations. Cavalry raids target bridges and locomotives. Both sides learn that modern war is as much about logistics as valor. An army without food, ammunition, and reinforcements will fail no matter how brave its soldiers. The North's superior industrial base and rail network begin to tell. Yet the South has advantages too. Interior lines of communication, defensive terrain, and above all, brilliant commanders who compensate for material disadvantages with tactical genius. Breathe slowly now, deeply. Feel your body relaxing, muscle by muscle. The weight of history need not burden you here. We are simply bearing witness, watching the great machinery of war grind forward across the landscape of memory. In September 1862, Robert E. Lee, now commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, after Joseph Johnston was wounded, makes a bold decision. He will invade the North. His army crosses the Potomac River into Maryland. Lee hopes a victory on northern soil might convince Britain and France to recognize the Confederacy. He hopes it might sway northern public opinion toward peace. He hopes, perhaps, to threaten Washington itself. But luck is not with him. A Union soldier finds a copy of Lee's orders wrapped around cigars, dropped carelessly by a Confederate officer. McClellan, normally so cautious, now knows exactly where Lee's forces are and what they plan to do. The armies converge on a small town called Sharpsburg, Maryland, along Antietam Creek. September 17th, 1862, becomes the bloodiest single day in American history. Picture the landscape: rolling farmland, a sunken road worn down by years of wagon traffic, a cornfield, stalks tall and golden in the early autumn, a simple stone bridge over the creek, a whitewashed church on a gentle rise, all of it about to become a landscape of horror. The battle begins at dawn. Union forces attack through the cornfield. The stalks provide concealment, but also confusion. Men fire at shapes and shadows. The corn is cut down by bullets as if by a scythe. Bodies fall among the stalks. The cornfield changes hands again and again, neither side able to hold it. By mid-morning, fighting has spread to the sunken road. Confederate soldiers crouch below its banks, protected by the earth itself. They pour fire into Union troops, advancing across open ground. The attackers fall in waves. The road becomes so full of Confederate dead that it earns a new name: Bloody Lane. At the southern end of the battlefield, Union forces struggle for hours to cross a stone bridge, facing withering fire from Georgian sharpshooters on the heights above. Finally, late in the afternoon, they force their way across. The bridge will forever after be called Burnside Bridge, named for the Union general whose troops took it at such terrible cost. By evening, both armies are fought to exhaustion. Lee's invasion has failed. His army is battered, vulnerable. McClellan has fresh reserves that could destroy Lee's force if he commits them. But McClellan, ever cautious, holds back. That night, Lee's army slips back across the Potomac into Virginia. The battle is technically a draw, but strategically a Union victory. Lee's invasion has been stopped. The Confederacy has lost its best chance to win foreign recognition. The cost: over 22,000 casualties in a single day. More Americans killed and wounded in 12 hours than in the entire Revolutionary War. The dead lie in rows in the fields. Local civilians, stunned and horrified, emerge from their cellars to find their farms transformed into charnel houses. The wounded fill every barn, church and house for miles. Clara Barton, who will later found the American Red Cross, works tirelessly among the wounded, earning the nickname Angel of the Battlefield. Photographers arrive after the battle. Their images, the first widely distributed photographs of war dead, shock the nation. Americans see, for the first time, what industrial war really means. Bodies swollen in the sun, faces frozen in final agony. The romantic notions of glorious combat die in those Maryland fields along with the soldiers. But from this terrible day will come something else, a promise of redemption for a nation's sins. Let yourself sink deeper now. The weight on your chest is just the blanket. The sounds around you are just the house settling, the wind outside. History cannot hurt you here. You are safe in the present, watching the past from a great distance. The Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln has been waiting. He knows he wants to issue a proclamation freeing the slaves, but his advisers warn him, do it after a defeat, and it will look like desperation. Wait for a victory, however narrow. Antietam provides that victory. On September 22, 1862, 5 days after the battle, Lincoln issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It declares that on January 1, 1863, all slaves in states still in rebellion will be thenceforward, and forever free. It is a carefully calculated document. It does not free slaves in the border states, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, Delaware, that have remained in the Union. It does not free slaves in Confederate areas already under Union control. Critics call it meaningless, a proclamation freeing people over whom the government has no power. But they miss its deeper significance. The war has transformed. It is no longer simply about preserving the Union. It is now explicitly about ending slavery. Every Union advance now brings freedom. Every freed slave can now take up arms for the Union. The war has become a revolution, On New Year's Day 1863, Lincoln signs the final proclamation. He has been shaking hands at a New Year's reception for hours, his right hand cramped and tired. But he takes up the pen carefully, steadies his hand and signs his full name, Abraham Lincoln, clear and legible. "If my name ever goes into history," he says, "it will be for this act." He is right. Picture that moment. A winter morning in Washington. Snow on the ground. The president in his office, the pen scratching across paper, transforming millions of lives with ink and parchment. In the South, slaves hear the news through the grapevine, whispered from plantation to plantation, passed along secret channels. Freedom is coming. Not everywhere, not all at once, but it is coming. Hope, that most dangerous and beautiful of things, begins to bloom. In the North, abolitionists rejoice, though many wish the proclamation had gone further. Frederick Douglass, the great orator and former slave, calls it a step in the right direction. African American men begin enlisting in the Union Army, in large numbers. By war's end, nearly 200,000 black soldiers will serve. They fight not just for the Union, but for their own freedom and that of their families. They prove their courage on bloody battlefields, earning respect through sacrifice. The proclamation also ends any chance of European intervention. Britain and France, both having abolished slavery in their own empires, cannot now support the Confederacy without appearing to endorse slavery. The South's hopes for foreign recognition die with Lincoln's signature. The war has found its moral center. All the suffering, all the death, must now serve a purpose larger than political union. It must serve freedom itself. Rest now. Let these words wash over you like waves on a distant shore. The story continues, but you need not hold it all. It will be here, waiting, whenever you choose to return. Summer 1863. Lee invades the North again, this time into Pennsylvania. His army is confident, victorious after a stunning triumph at Chancellorsville in May, though that victory cost them Stonewall Jackson, shot accidentally by his own men and dead within days. Lee's army moves north through the Shenandoah Valley, then crosses into Maryland and Pennsylvania. The soldiers forage liberally, taking what they need from northern farms. Some are barefoot, their shoes worn through by hard marching. They wrap their feet in rags and keep walking. The armies converge, almost by accident, at a small crossroads town called Gettysburg. July 1st, 1863. Confederate forces, approaching from the west, encounter Union cavalry on the ridges outside town. What begins as a skirmish escalates rapidly as both sides rush reinforcements to the fight. By afternoon, tens of thousands of men are engaged in a swirling, desperate battle through the streets and fields. The Union forces are pushed back through the town, falling back to high ground south of Gettysburg, Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, Culp's Hill. As evening comes, they dig in, placing artillery, building hasty breastworks. General George Gordon Meade, newly appointed to command the Army of the Potomac, arrives after dark. He surveys the position by moonlight, a fishhook-shaped line of high ground. Good defensive terrain. He decides to stay and fight. Picture that night. Thousands of men lying in the grass, too exhausted to dig proper entrenchments. Stars overhead, impossibly bright. The summer air still warm. Somewhere in the darkness, a wounded man calls for water. Somewhere else, officers study maps by candlelight, trying to understand where all the units are positioned, what tomorrow might bring. Lee attacks. He aims for both ends of the Union line, trying to turn the flanks, drive the defenders off the high ground. On the Union left, Confederate forces surge forward toward two rocky hills called Little Round Top and Big Round Top. A Union officer, Colonel Strong Vincent, recognizes the danger. If the Confederates take Little Round Top, they can enfilade the entire Union line. He rushes his brigade to the hilltop without waiting for orders. The fighting there becomes desperate. The 20th Maine Regiment, commanded by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, a college professor before the war, holds the far left of the entire Union Army. They must not break. If they break, the flank collapses. The Confederates attack again and again. The main men fire until their ammunition runs out. Chamberlain, seeing his line about to be overwhelmed, makes a desperate decision: fix bayonets and charge downhill. It works. The sudden counterattack breaks the Confederate assault. Little Round, top holds. Elsewhere along the line, fighting rages through wheat fields, peach orchards and rocky ground. A place called Devil's Den becomes a sniper's paradise and a killing ground. The boulder-strewn slopes run red. By nightfall, the Union line has bent, but not broken. Both armies lick their wounds, bury their dead by torchlight, prepare for another day. July 3. Lee makes a fateful decision. He will attack the centre of the Union line. If he can break through, he can split Meade's army in two. The morning is hot and still. Soldiers on both sides know something terrible is coming. They can feel it in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. At 1:00 p.m. the Confederate artillery opens fire. Over 150 guns, all at once. The sound is beyond description, a continuous roar that can be heard 50 miles away. Shells scream overhead, explode along Cemetery Ridge. Trees are shattered. Caissons explode in geysers of flame. Horses scream and fall. The Union artillery fires back. For 2 hours, the earth trembles with the bombardment. Then, around 3:00 p.m., the guns fall silent. An eerie quiet descends. From the Confederate lines, across 3/4 of a mile of open ground, 12,500 men begin to march toward the Union center. They move in parade ground formation, battle flags flying, officers on horseback, lines dressed perfectly. It is magnificent and terrible. Pickett's charge, history will call it, though George Pickett commanded only one of the 3 divisions making the assault. At first, they advance in relative silence. But as they cross the halfway point, the Union artillery opens fire. Solid shot tears, gaps in the Confederate ranks. Shells explode overhead, spraying shrapnel. Men fall, but the formation keeps moving, closing ranks over the bodies. As they reach the Emmitsburg Road, the Union infantry joins in. Thousands of rifles firing as fast as men can load and shoot. The sound is like continuous thunder. Smoke blankets the field. A few hundred Confederates, brave beyond measure, desperate beyond reason, reach the Union line. For a brief moment, they break through, crossing a stone wall, planting their flags. This moment, this high water mark, is as close as the Confederacy will ever come to winning the war. But there are too few of them. They are surrounded, overwhelmed. The breakthrough collapses. The survivors fall back across that terrible field, walking now, not running, too exhausted, too stunned to run. Lee meets them as they return. "It is all my fault," he tells them. "It is I who have lost this fight." That night, it rains. The thunder seems anticlimactic after the thunder of guns. Lee prepares to retreat. His invasion has failed. His army is battered. The war, though it will continue for nearly 2 more years, has reached its turning point. Over 3 days, roughly 50,000 men have been killed, wounded or captured at Gettysburg. The casualties are almost incomprehensible. The town's 2,400 residents find themselves with 22,000 wounded soldiers to care for. Every building becomes a hospital. The smell of death hangs over the countryside for weeks. 4 months later, in November 1863, President Lincoln will come to Gettysburg for the dedication of a cemetery for the Union dead. He will speak for just 2 minutes, delivering 272 words that will become the most famous speech in American history. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He will redefine the war's purpose, framing it not just as a fight to preserve the Union, but as a test of whether democracy itself can survive. that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Close your eyes now. Feel the cool pillow against your cheek. The battles fade into history. The voices quiet. The smoke clears. You are here now, safe and whole, while the past sleeps peacefully in the distance. While Gettysburg captures the nation's attention, another crucial battle reaches its climax on the same day, July 4, 1863, 1,000 miles to the west. For months, Ulysses S. Grant has been maneuvering to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi, the last major Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. Vicksburg sits on high bluffs overlooking the river, its guns commanding the waterway. Lincoln calls it the key. Take Vicksburg, and the Confederacy is cut in two, Texas and Arkansas isolated from the rest of the South. Grant tries multiple approaches through the winter and spring. He attempts to dig canals to bypass the city. He tries navigating through the bayous north of the city. Each attempt fails. The terrain defeats him. Swamps, rivers, dense vegetation. Finally, in a brilliant and risky campaign, Grant marches his army down the west bank of the Mississippi, crosses south of Vicksburg, and strikes inland. He cuts loose from his supply lines, living off the land, moving fast. He defeats Confederate forces in several battles, drives them back into Vicksburg's fortifications, and settles in for a siege. Picture the city as summer comes. Vicksburg sits on its bluffs, surrounded by Union forces. Grant's army digs trenches, moving closer each day. Artillery shells fall day and night. The civilians, unable to evacuate, trapped in the siege, dig caves into the hillsides, living underground like refugees from some ancient apocalypse. Food grows scarce. Soldiers receive ever smaller rations. Eventually, they are eating mules, rats, anything they can find. Disease spreads. The heat is oppressive. The bombardment never stops. Inside those caves, families huddle together. Children who should be playing in summer sunshine instead crouch in darkness, listening to the whistle and crash of shells overhead. Women keep diaries, recording the surreal horror of their situation. Tea parties held in caverns, social calls paid through bomb-scarred streets. One woman writes, "We are utterly cut off from the world, surrounded by a circle of fire. I think all the dogs and cats must be killed or starved. We don't see any more pitiful animals prowling around." On July 3rd, as Pickett's men charge across that Pennsylvania field, Confederate General John C. Pemberton asks Grant for terms. Grant, who has softened slightly since his unconditional surrender days, agrees to parole the garrison rather than send them to prison camps. He cannot spare the resources to guard and feed 30,000 prisoners. On July 4, 1863, the Confederate garrison marches out and stacks arms. The Stars and Stripes rises over Vicksburg. The Mississippi River, from its source to its mouth, is now under Union control. The Father of Waters again goes unvexed to the sea. Lincoln writes, "The twin victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg mark the war's strategic turning point. The Confederacy can no longer win. It can only hope to endure long enough to break Northern will. But breaking that will requires more than defensive victories. It requires political change in the North, a peace party coming to power. And that hope grows dimmer with each Union success. The Mississippi flows on, as it has for millennia, caring nothing for human conflicts. The water reflects moonlight. The current carries leaves and branches downstream. Everything passes. Everything changes. Even war. The winter of 1863-64 brings a pause, but not peace. Both armies rest, refit, and prepare for the spring campaigns. Lincoln, finally, has found his general. Ulysses S. Grant is summoned east, promoted to lieutenant general, a rank held before only by George Washington, and given command of all Union armies. Grant's plan is simple and brutal. Constant pressure. He will attack, and keep attacking. He will not retreat after battles, but keep advancing, keep forcing Lee to fight, keep grinding down the Confederate army, even at terrible cost. In early May 1864, Grant crosses the Rapidan River and plunges into an area called the Wilderness, dense forest, tangled undergrowth, terrain that negates the Union's advantages in artillery and numbers. The Battle of the Wilderness is chaos incarnate. Units lose contact with each other in the thick woods. Men fire at sounds and shadows. The undergrowth catches fire, and wounded soldiers burn to death, their screams haunting the survivors forever. Neither side wins. The casualties are horrific, nearly 30,000 men in 2 days. In previous campaigns, Union commanders would have retreated after such losses, crossing back over the river to lick their wounds. Grant does not retreat. He moves south, trying to get between Lee and Richmond. Picture the Union soldiers marching that night. They expect to turn north, back to familiar camps. Instead, the column turns south. Slowly, they realize what this means. They are not retreating. They are advancing. Despite the losses, despite the horror, they are moving forward. The soldiers begin to cheer. Lee blocks Grant at Spotsylvania Courthouse. More vicious fighting. At a place called the Bloody Angle, combat continues for nearly 20 hours of continuous fighting in rain and darkness. Men shooting at muzzle flashes, stabbing with bayonets through gaps in logs, the dead piled 3 deep. Grant keeps moving south. Lee keeps blocking him. They fight at the North Anna River, then at Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor, in early June 1864, becomes one of the war's worst moments. Grant orders a frontal assault against entrenched Confederate positions. His men know it is suicide. Some write their names and addresses on pieces of paper and pin them to their uniforms so their bodies can be identified. At 4:30 in the morning, they attack. In less than an hour, 7,000 Union soldiers fall. The assault gains nothing. Grant later writes in his memoirs that Cold Harbor is the only attack he regrets ordering. The armies entrench. For days the wounded lie in no man's land between the lines, dying slowly, while neither side dares arrange a truce to collect them. Their cries for water haunt both armies. Grant's campaign, from the Wilderness through Cold Harbor, costs the Union Army nearly 50,000 casualties in 6 weeks. Northern newspapers call Grant a butcher. Families receive the dreaded telegrams. Hospitals overflowed. The nation grows weary. But Grant has accomplished something crucial. Lee's army is being bled white. The Confederacy cannot replace its losses. Every battle, even victories, weakens them. Grant's strategy of attrition is working, though at a terrible human cost. In mid-June, Grant does something brilliant. He breaks contact with Lee, marches his army south, and crosses the James River. He is going for Petersburg, the railroad hub that supplies Richmond. If he can take Petersburg, Richmond must fall. Lee barely gets troops there in time to hold the city. Another siege begins. The armies dig in around Petersburg. Miles of trenches, fortifications, a preview of World War I 50 years in the future. The siege will last 10 months, from June 1864 to April 1865. It becomes a war of snipers and sharpshooters, of mines and countermines, of raids and artillery barrages. It is grinding, exhausting, unglamorous war. Breathe deeply now. Let the tension in your shoulders fade. These old battles have no power over you here. They are stories told in the darkness, lessons written in sorrow, memories preserved so that we might understand what was sacrificed, what was gained, what was lost. While Grant grinds away at Lee in Virginia, William Tecumseh Sherman, Grant's trusted subordinate, conducts a different kind of campaign in Georgia. Sherman commands 3 armies, totaling 100,000 men. His mission: capture Atlanta, the South's industrial heart and railroad junction. Opposing him is Joseph E. Johnston, a brilliant defensive general with about 65,000 men. Johnston conducts a masterful fighting retreat, making Sherman pay for every mile, falling back to successive defensive positions, refusing to be trapped or destroyed. The campaign is a chess match. Sherman maneuvers, Johnston blocks. Sherman flanks, Johnston withdraws. Through May, June, and July 1864, Sherman pushes deeper into Georgia. The battles, Resaca, Kennesaw Mountain, the Chattahoochee River, are hard fought but inconclusive. In mid-July, Jefferson Davis makes a fateful error. Frustrated by Johnston's retreats, he replaces him with John Bell Hood. Aggressive, impetuous, one-legged from a wound at Chickamauga, arm crippled from Gettysburg, strapped to his saddle for battle. Hood does exactly what Davis wants. He attacks, and Sherman destroys him. 3 times Hood attacks. 3 times he is repulsed, with heavy losses. The Confederate army, which Johnston had preserved through skillful retreat, is shattered by Hood's reckless aggression. On September 2, 1864, Union forces enter Atlanta. Town in Sherman telegraphs Washington, "Atlanta is ours and fairly won." The news electrifies the North. Lincoln, facing re-election in November against a peace candidate, has been deeply pessimistic about his chances. The fall of Atlanta changes everything. The war is being won. The nation will endure. Sherman rests his army in Atlanta, then proposes something radical. He will abandon his supply lines, leave Atlanta, and march his army across Georgia to the sea. He will live off the land, destroying everything of military value in his path. He will demonstrate that the Confederacy cannot protect its own heartland. He will make Georgia howl. Grant approves. Lincoln nervously approves. On November 15, 1864, Sherman's army leaves Atlanta. Indy. Behind them the city burns. Sherman has ordered the destruction of military and industrial targets, but the flames spread. The glow is visible for miles. The march to the sea is unlike anything in American warfare. Sherman's 60,000 men march in 4 parallel columns, each a day's march apart, covering a swath of Georgia 60 miles wide. They tear up railroad tracks, heating the rails and twisting them around trees, Sherman's neckties. They burn warehouses, cotton gins, and factories. They seize food, livestock, and supplies. Picture the Georgia countryside in late November. The roads are clogged with not just soldiers, but with thousands of freed slaves, families who see the Union Army as their road to freedom. They follow the columns carrying their few possessions, singing hymns, children riding on wagons. Sherman's orders prohibit soldiers from entering private homes, but the orders are imperfectly enforced. Foragers operating on the army's fringes loot plantations. Some commit acts of vandalism and cruelty. The line between legitimate military action and wanton destruction blurs. For white Southerners, Sherman's march is a trauma that will not heal for generations. For enslaved people, it is liberation arriving on the march. On December 21, 1864, Sherman's army reaches Savannah on the coast. The city surrenders without a fight. Sherman sends Lincoln a telegram, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." Sherman then turns north, marching into South Carolina, the state where secession began. If Georgia howled, South Carolina will scream. His army is angry now, punitive. South Carolina, they believe, started this war. South Carolina will pay you. The march through the Carolinas is even more destructive than the march through Georgia. Columbia state capitol burns, whether by accident or design remains disputed. The army lives off a land already exhausted by war. By early 1865, Sherman is approaching the North Carolina border. His march has cut a scar across the heart of the Confederacy. The South's ability to wage war is collapsing. Let your breathing slow and tune now. Feel yourself sinking further into rest. The march continues in memory, but you need not march with it. You can watch from here, from safety, from the peaceful darkness of this quiet night. Amidst all the destruction, there are those who dedicate themselves to healing rather than harm. Clara Barton, already mentioned at Antietam, becomes one of the war's most celebrated figures. She organizes supply deliveries to the front, nurses wounded soldiers, searches for the missing. Her compassion and competence earn her the respect of generals and common soldiers alike. Picture her in a field hospital, sleeves rolled up, apron stained, moving among rows of wounded men with water, bandages, kind words. She has no official status, no formal authority. She simply saw a need and filled it. Thousands of women serve as nurses, north and south. Some, like Dorothea Dix, organize nursing corps. Others work individually, running hospitals in their homes, caring for wounded strangers. They face criticism. Nursing is not considered respectable work for women, involving as it does intimate contact with men's bodies. But the desperate need overcomes social prejudice. By war's end, nursing has become an established profession, a path for women to serve beyond the domestic sphere. The United States Sanitary Commission, a volunteer organization, raises millions of dollars and distributes supplies to Union armies. They organize sanitary fairs in northern cities, raising funds while boosting morale. They inspect army camps and hospitals, pushing for better hygiene and medical care. On the Confederate side, similar organizations struggle with fewer resources but equal dedication. Southern women roll bandages, sew uniforms, run aid societies. They transform their homes into hospitals, their parlors into surgical theaters. Religious organizations distribute Bibles and moral tracts. The United States Christian Commission sends volunteers to army camps to minister to soldiers' spiritual needs, conducting prayer meetings, writing letters for illiterate men, sitting with the dying. Military chaplains serve with every regiment, counseling soldiers, conducting services, burying the dead. They hear confessions, offer absolution, try to make sense of senseless suffering. And there are the individual acts of mercy that never make the history books. A soldier sharing his rations with a starving enemy prisoner. A woman hiding a wounded man from both armies until he can heal. A doctor working through exhaustion to save just one more life. These acts of compassion do not stop the war, but they preserve humanity within it. They remind us that even in humanity's darkest hours, light persists. Rest now. Let these gentler images comfort you. The nurses, the volunteers, the chaplains, they move through history like angels, tending wounds, offering hope. Their work continues in spirit, wherever suffering is met with compassion. Winter 1864-65. The Confederacy is dying, though it does not yet know it is dead. Lee's army huddles in the trenches around Petersburg, undersupplied, underfed, slowly starving. Rations have been cut again and again. Men receive a handful of cornmeal, some dried peas, occasionally a small piece of meat. It is not enough. They grow gaunt, hollow-eyed. Desertion becomes epidemic. Men slip away in the night, heading home to families they know are suffering. Lee understands. He does not condemn them. But every deserter weakens an army, already outnumbered 3-1. The Confederate government in Richmond struggles to maintain even the pretense of function. The currency is worthless. A single egg costs $5 in Confederate money. Food riots break out in the capital. Slaves are being impressed into army labor, promised freedom in exchange, a desperate measure that acknowledges slavery's imminent end, while trying to postpone it. In the North, Lincoln is inaugurated for a second term on March 4, 1865. His second inaugural address is brief, only 701 words, but it is profound. He does not gloat over impending victory. Instead, he reflects on the war's meaning, its cost, its moral dimension. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. He speaks of the war as divine judgment on the entire nation for the sin of slavery. Both North and South are guilty. Both must suffer. If God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another, drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago. So still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Then, in the address's famous conclusion, he calls for reconciliation, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Picture that moment, a cold March morning. Lincoln standing on the Capitol steps, the dome now completed, a symbol of Union preserved. His voice carries across the crowd. Somewhere in that crowd stands John Wilkes Booth, nursing his hatred, planning murder. But that horror lies in the future. Today, Lincoln speaks of healing. Early April 1865, Grant finally breaks the siege of Petersburg. His forces punch through the Confederate lines. Lee's army evacuates Petersburg and Richmond. The Confederate government flees Richmond. Jefferson Davis boards a train south, carrying what government records and treasury funds he can salvage. Behind him, Richmond burns. Fires set to destroy government records and military supplies spread through the city. The capital of the Confederacy goes up in flames. Union troops enter Richmond on April 3. Among the first to enter the city is a column of black soldiers from the 80th IV Corps. They march through streets lined with newly freed slaves singing, weeping, praising God. President Lincoln himself visits Richmond the next day, walking its streets with a small escort, black children running alongside him. Lee's army retreats west, hoping to reach the mountains, resupply, and continue the fight. But they are exhausted, starving, pursued relentlessly. Union cavalry blocks their path. Supply trains are captured. The escape routes narrow to nothing. On April 8, Lee's army camps near Appomattox Courthouse, a small village in central Virginia. That night, Lee holds a council of war with his remaining generals. Some urge guerrilla warfare, disperse the army, continue fighting from the hills and forests. Lee refuses. It would turn Virginia into a wasteland. The suffering would continue indefinitely. It is time to end this. April 9, 1865, Palm Sunday. In the early morning, Confederate forces make one last attempt to break through the Union lines. For a brief moment, they drive the cavalry back. Then Union infantry appears, thousands of men in blue, blocking every road. Lee, watching from a ridge, sees the futility. "There is nothing left for me to do but go and see General Grant," he says, "and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." Messages are exchanged. A meeting is arranged. Lee rides to the village of Appomattox Courthouse, to the home of Wilmer McLean. Wilmer McLean has a strange connection to the war. In 1861 he lived near Manassas, and the first Battle of Bull Run was fought on his property. Seeking peace, he moved to Appomattox, about as far from the fighting as he could get while staying in Virginia. Now, by pure chance, the war will end in his parlour. "The war began in my front yard," he will later say, "and ended in my front parlour." General Grant arrives at 1:30 p.m. He is mud-spattered from hard riding. Lee is immaculate in full-dress uniform, wearing a jewelled sword. They make an odd contrast. Grant, 42, the son of a tanner, rumpled and plain, Lee, 58, from Virginia's first family, aristocratic and dignified. Yet they treat each other with perfect courtesy. They chat briefly about the Mexican War, where both had served as young officers. Then Lee brings the conversation to its purpose. Grant's terms are generous. Confederate soldiers will surrender their weapons and go home. Officers may keep their sidearms. All will be paroled, not imprisoned. Grant even allows men who claim to own horses to keep them. They will need them for spring ploughing. Lee, reading the terms, is visibly moved. "This will have a very happy effect on my army," he says. The documents are signed. As he emerges from the house, his soldiers gather around him, reaching up to touch him, touch Traveller, his horse. Some are weeping. Lee speaks to them, his own voice thick with emotion. "Men, we have fought through the war together. I have done the best I could for you." Grant stands on the porch of the McLean house as Lee rides away. Union soldiers begin to cheer. Grant stops them. "The war is over," he says quietly. "The rebels are our countrymen again. The Army of Northern Virginia, that legendary force, victor of so many battles, stacks its arms 3 days later. Approximately 28,000 men remain, a shadow of its former strength. As they surrender their flags and muskets, Union soldiers stand at attention, saluting. Grant has ordered this, a gesture of respect, soldier to soldier. The war is not quite over. Other Confederate armies still exist, scattered across the South. But Lee's surrender breaks the Confederacy's back. Within weeks, the other armies will surrender too. Joseph E. Johnston surrenders to Sherman in North Carolina on April 26, departing. Richard Taylor surrenders in Alabama on May 4th. The Trans-Mississippi forces under Kirby Smith surrender on May 26th. By June 1865, it is truly over. 4 years of war, 620,000 to 750,000 dead. The estimates vary, but every count is horrific. More American casualties than all other American wars combined until Vietnam. In some southern towns, an entire generation of young men is simply gone. In some northern cities, hardly a family exists that has not lost someone. The cost in treasure is equally staggering. The Union spent over $3 billion. The Confederacy's economy is completely destroyed. The infrastructure of the South, railroads, factories, bridges, lies in ruins. But something has been gained. 4 million people have been freed from slavery. The United States has survived its greatest crisis. The question of secession has been settled forever. The Union is indivisible. Feel yourself drifting now, floating on the edge of sleep. The guns are silent at last. The long nightmare is ending. Breathe slowly, easily. Let go of the weight of these old sorrows. April 14th, 1865, Good Friday. 5 days after Lee's surrender, President Lincoln decides to attend a play at Ford's Theatre in Washington. Our American Cousin, a light comedy. After 4 years of war's burden, he wants an evening of laughter. He sits in the presidential box with his wife Mary and 2 guests. The play progresses. Act 3, Scene 2. It is a little after 10 p.m. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor, Confederate sympathizer, consumed by rage at the South's defeat, enters the box. He carries a Derringer pistol and a knife. He knows every inch of Ford's Theatre. He has planned this moment carefully. Booth fires a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Then he leaps to the stage, breaking his leg in the landing, and shouts, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. He escapes through the back door. Lincoln is carried across the street to a boarding house. Doctors examine him, but the wound is fatal. The bullet has entered his brain. He never regains consciousness. Through the night, cabinet members and officials keep vigil in the small room. Mary Lincoln weeps. The president's breathing grows labored, irregular. At 7:22 am on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln dies. Now he belongs to the ages. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton murmurs. The news spreads like a shockwave through a nation just beginning to celebrate peace. Church bells toll. Businesses close. People weep openly in the streets. Blacks and whites alike mourn. Even in the defeated South, many are horrified. Whatever they thought of Lincoln's policies, assassination is an abomination. Booth is hunted down and killed 12 days later, cornered in a Virginia barn. His co-conspirators, the assassination was part of a larger, failed plot to kill multiple government officials, are captured and hanged. But Lincoln cannot be brought back. His funeral train travels from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, retracing the route he took to his inauguration 4 years earlier. In every city it passes through, thousands gather to pay respects. The train stops. The casket is carried to lie in state. People file past, hour after hour, saying goodbye to the man who saved the Union and freed the slaves. Picture those mourners. Union veterans in worn blue uniforms, their sleeves pinned where arms used to be. Freed slaves wearing their finest clothes, tears streaming down their faces. Mothers clutching children, explaining who this great man was and why his death matters. Older men who remember the Revolution, understanding that they have witnessed another birth of the nation. Lincoln is buried in Springfield on May 4th, 1865. The nation has lost the one man who might have guided it through the difficult work of reconstruction with wisdom and compassion. With malice toward none, with charity for all. His words will echo through history, but their author is gone, and with him perhaps the best hope for a gentle peace. The guns have fallen silent. The soldiers come home. But the war's consequences will shape America for decades, generations, perhaps forever. 4 million people are suddenly free. Freedom, that beautiful, terrifying gift. Free to leave plantations where they and their ancestors were enslaved. Free to search for family members sold away years ago. Free to work for wages, to learn to read, to vote. But free into what? They own nothing. They have no money, no land, no tools. The South's economy, built on slave labor, has collapsed. There is no infrastructure to help them. There is no safety net. Some former slaves stay where they are, working for wages now instead of under the lash. Others take to the roads, testing their freedom, searching for loved ones. The Freedmen's Bureau, a federal agency created to help the transition, does what it can with limited resources. It establishes schools, negotiates labor contracts, distributes food, but it is overwhelmed by the scale of the need. In the first flush of freedom, there is remarkable progress. Black churches spring up across the South. Previously, slaves were required to worship in white churches under white supervision. Now they create their own congregations, their own spiritual homes. Schools opened. Freed slaves of all ages crowd into classrooms, hungry for learning denied them for generations. Old women who've picked cotton for 70 years learn their letters. Children devour every book they can find. Education becomes a cherished goal, a pathway to full citizenship. In 1866, Congress passes the Civil Rights Act, declaring that all persons born in the United States are citizens with equal protection under the law. In 1868, this principle is enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. In 1870, the 15th Amendment guarantees that the right to vote cannot be denied on account of race. Black men vote, hold office, serve in state legislatures and Congress. For a brief, shining moment, it seems the promise of freedom might actually be fulfilled. But there is resistance. Bitter, violent resistance. The Ku Klux Klan and similar terrorist organizations emerge across the South. They use violence and intimidation to suppress black political participation. They burn schools, attack voters, assassinate leaders. The federal government responds, sometimes vigorously, sometimes half-heartedly. The South must be reconstructed, brought back into the Union, its states reorganized with new constitutions. But how? Under what terms? These questions consume national politics for years. Andrew Johnson, who became president upon Lincoln's death, favors a lenient approach. He is a Southerner himself from Tennessee, a former slave owner. He opposes black suffrage. Andrew Johnson, who became president upon Lincoln's death, favors a lenient approach. He is a Southerner himself from Tennessee, a former slave owner. He opposes black suffrage, vetoes civil rights legislation, grants pardons freely to former Confederates. Congress, controlled by radical Republicans who want stronger protections for freed slaves, clashes with him repeatedly. In 1868, Johnson becomes the first president to be impeached, though the Senate falls one vote short of removing him from office. The struggle over Reconstruction has become a constitutional crisis. Picture the South in these years, 1865, 1866, 1867. It is a landscape of ruins. Charleston, Columbia, Richmond, Atlanta, cities lie in ashes. Railroads are torn up. Bridges are destroyed. Fields lie fallow, their workforce scattered. The wealth that existed before the war, much of it represented by the value of enslaved people, has simply evaporated. Confederate money is worthless paper. Confederate bonds will never be repaid. Plantation owners who were wealthy on paper in 1860 are destitute in 1865. The entire Southern economic system must be rebuilt from scratch. For many white Southerners, defeat is not just military but psychological. Everything they believed about their society, their cause, their righteousness has been proven false by Union victory. Some accept this, adapt and move forward. Others retreat into what will become the lost cause mythology, the romantic notion that the Confederacy fought nobly for states' rights, that slavery was benign, that Reconstruction was a tyrannical imposition. This mythology will poison American race relations for more than a century. Union soldiers, meanwhile, return to their homes across the North. They have parades, celebrations, tearful reunions. But many carry wounds that will never heal. Missing limbs, shattered health, memories that wake them screaming in the night. There is no Veterans Administration, no psychological counselling, no real support system. Some communities establish soldiers' homes for disabled veterans. Some states provide small pensions. But many veterans simply struggle on, trying to rebuild lives interrupted by war. The Grand Army of the Republic, a Union veterans organization, becomes a powerful political and social force, keeping alive the memory of the war and the Union cause. They hold reunions, march in Memorial Day parades, ensure that their service is remembered. In the South, Confederate veterans form their own organizations. United Confederate Veterans, Sons of Confederate Veterans. They too hold reunions, preserve memories, but their memories are tinged with loss and defiance. As years pass, some Union and Confederate veterans begin meeting together, shaking hands across old battle lines. At the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg in 1913, thousands of elderly veterans, blue and grey together, gather at the battlefield. They shake hands at the stone wall where Pickett's charge met its doom. They pose for photographs, arms around each other's shoulders. Ancient enemies now, simply old men remembering their youth. But this reconciliation comes at a cost. As white veterans North and South find common ground in military valor and shared suffering, the cause for which the war was fought, the freedom and equality of black Americans, is increasingly forgotten or deliberately suppressed. By the 1870s, Reconstruction is faltering. The North's will to enforce equality in the South weakens. Federal troops are gradually withdrawn. Southern whites use violence, intimidation, and legal chicanery to disenfranchise black voters and reimpose white supremacy. The disputed election of 1876 leads to a political compromise. Republican Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, but in exchange the remaining federal troops are withdrawn from the South. Reconstruction is over. What follows is the nadir of American race relations. Jim Crow laws establish formal segregation. Poll taxes, literacy tests and grandfather clauses strip away voting rights. Lynching becomes a tool of terror. The promise of freedom is betrayed. This too is part of the war's legacy. Not just the liberation, but the incomplete reconstruction, the promises made and broken, the work left unfinished. Breathe slowly now. Let these sorrows settle gently. History is not simple. Victory is not clean. Even the most righteous causes leave complicated legacies. But that does not mean they were not worth fighting for. Let us count the cost as best we can. At least 620,000 soldiers dead, Union and Confederate combined. Some historians now believe the number may be as high as 750,000. To put this in perspective, the United States population in 1860 was 31 million. Today, an equivalent percentage would mean over 6 million deaths. 2% of the American population died in the Civil War. In the South, the percentage was higher. Nearly 1 in 4 white men of military age did not survive the war. The number of wounded defies precise counting. Hundreds of thousands carried scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. Whole families were destroyed. Tens of thousands of widows, orphans, parents who buried their children. The economic cost was equally staggering. The Union spent approximately $6.70 billion 1860s dollars prosecuting the war. The Confederacy spent everything it had and more. In modern terms, accounting for inflation and economic growth, the war cost over $400 billion. But some things cannot be measured in dollars. The psychic cost to the nation, the trauma, the division, legacy of bitterness, echoes still. Yet, from this suffering came transformation. Slavery, that original sin of the American Republic, the contradiction at the heart of a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal, was destroyed. 4 million people and their descendants gained freedom. The Constitution was amended to guarantee citizenship and equal protection under law. The war established forever that the United States is not a voluntary compact of sovereign states, but an indivisible nation. No state can leave. The Union is perpetual. The war accelerated industrialization, modernization, the expansion of federal power. It gave birth to income tax, national currency, transcontinental railroads, land-grant universities. It changed the scale and scope of American government forever. And it left us with memories, stories passed down through generations. The photographs of Matthew Brady and his contemporaries, showing us war's reality for the first time. The letters soldiers wrote home, preserved in attics and archives. The battlefields themselves, now national parks, where you can still walk the ground where history turned. Picture Gettysburg on a quiet morning. Mist rises from the fields. Monuments stand silent on the ridges where men fought and died. The stone walls remain where soldiers crouched and fired. The land remembers. Or Antietam, where you can still see the sunken road. Or Shiloh, where the peach orchard has been replanted. Or the Petersburg trenches, where grass now grows where men once huddled in mud. These places speak to us across time. They remind us of what was at stake, what was sacrificed, what was won and lost. The generation that fought the war knew they had lived through something unprecedented. Union veteran Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who would later serve on the Supreme Court, spoke of having touched the hem of war and found it terrible but also transcendent. In our youth, he said, our hearts were touched with fire. Confederate soldier Sam Watkins, writing his memoirs decades later, remembered both the horror and the camaraderie. I was a soldier, he wrote, and I do not propose to tell any lies about it. The war shaped American literature. Walt Whitman, who served as a nurse, wrote poems of stunning power about the war's suffering and meaning. The real war, he said, will never get in the books. Yet he tried to capture it anyway, in verse that still moves readers today. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Civil War veterans grew old. By the 1930s, only a handful remained. The last verified Union veteran died in 1956. The last Confederate veteran died in 1959. The last widow of a Civil War veteran, a woman who married a much older veteran late in his life, did not die until 2008. The living memory fades. But the history remains. The Civil War defined what America would become. Without Union victory, there might be two nations where one stands now. Without emancipation, slavery might have persisted into the 20th century. Without the war's trauma and transformation, America's trajectory would have been entirely different. The war tested whether a democracy could survive internal division. Lincoln's question at Gettysburg, whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal could long endure, was answered. It could. It did. At terrible cost, but it endured. Let us listen for a moment to the voices of those who were there, not the generals whose names fill history books, but the ordinary soldiers, the nurses, the civilians who lived through the storm. A Union soldier writes home from camp, "Dear Mother, we have had another fight and I am safe. Many of my friends are gone. I cannot write more now. Please do not worry." A Confederate soldier, captured and imprisoned, writes on scraps of paper, "We get a little cornbread and some soup. It is enough to keep us alive, nothing more. I dream of home." A nurse working through the night after a battle writes in her journal, "I gave water to a boy who could not have been more than 16. He thanked me and asked if I would write to his mother. Before I could get paper, he was gone." A freed slave, interviewed years later, remembers, "When the soldiers came through, we knew. We couldn't say nothing, but we knew. Freedom was coming. I was 50 years old before I was free, but I was free." A woman in Atlanta writes as Sherman's army approaches, "We hear the cannons day and night now. Everyone who can leave has left. We who remain pray and wait and wonder what will become of us." A battlefield surgeon records, "I have operated until I can barely stand. The pile of limbs outside the tent grows higher. This is butchery, not medicine. But if I do not amputate, they will die of gangrene. God help us all." These voices, fragmentary, painful, honest, bring the war closer than any strategic analysis. They remind us that history is made by human beings, each one carrying hopes and fears, each one capable of courage and cruelty, each one mattering. The years immediately after the war bring a strange liminal quality to the nation. The country is reunited on paper, but deeply divided in spirit. The South is defeated, but not reconciled. The freed slaves are legally free, but not truly equal. Everywhere, people are trying to return to normal life, though nothing is normal anymore. Farmers plough fields where battles were fought, turning up bullets and bones with their ploughs. Towns rebuild, but the young men who should be doing the work are dead or maimed. In cemeteries across the nation, new graves stretch in long rows. At first, many Confederate dead lie in unmarked graves, their identities unknown. Gradually, organizations form to give them proper burial, to mark their graves, to preserve their memory. The national cemetery system expands rapidly. Arlington, Robert E. Lee's former estate, seized by the federal government during the war, becomes a vast cemetery. Thousands of Union soldiers are buried there, including the unknowns, their headstones simply marked Unknown U.S. Soldier. Memorial Day begins as Decoration Day, a time to decorate the graves of fallen soldiers with flowers and flags. It starts in the South, spreads to the North, becomes a national day of remembrance. Gradually, slowly, life continues. Former soldiers marry, have children, build businesses, plant crops, earn. The nation industrializes rapidly. Railroads spread across the continent. Immigrants arrive. The western frontier expands. But the war is always there, just beneath the surface. In the missing limbs. In the widow's black dress. In the speeches politicians give. In the songs people sing. In the divisions that persist. Let yourself rest now. Feel the quiet settle around you. The war is over, has been over for more than a century and a half. All those who fought are at rest now. All those who suffered have found peace. The battles are memories, the pain is history, the lessons endure. The fields grow quiet now. The smoke has cleared. The thunder of guns that once rolled across these hills like storms has faded into silence. Where armies once marched, grass grows tall and green. Where soldiers fell, wildflowers bloom in spring. Where hospitals received the wounded children now play. Time has done its work, covering the scars, softening the edges, turning battlefields into peaceful meadows. The men who fought, Union and Confederate, black and white, immigrant and native-born, have all gone to their rest. Their arguments are settled. Their causes are history. They sleep now beneath the earth they once fought over, and that earth does not distinguish blue from grey. But they left us something. They left us a nation preserved. They left us freedom purchased at terrible cost. They left us lessons about courage and sacrifice, about the price of division and the possibility of reunion. They left us the understanding that some things are worth fighting for, and that all wars, even necessary ones, are tragedies. Walk through Gettysburg on a summer evening, when the tourists have gone and the monuments cast long shadows. You can almost hear them still, not the guns, not the shouting, but something gentler. The rustle of wind through grass, the distant call of a mourning dove, the whisper of memory. They would want us to remember, not to glorify war, but to understand what it cost, not to forget the causes, but to learn from them, not to be haunted by the past, but informed by it. The war changed everything it touched. It freed millions. It killed hundreds of thousands. It destroyed one nation and reforged another. It tested every value America claimed to hold and found some wanting, others worthy. It revealed the worst of humanity and the best. It showed that progress sometimes demands sacrifice, and that sacrifice demands meaning. As you drift towards sleep now, let these images fade like photographs left too long in sunlight. Let the stories become dreams, the history become rest. The nation they fought to preserve endures. The freedom they died for expands still, imperfectly, incompletely, but real. And in the quiet darkness of this night, you can feel it, the peace that came after the storm. Not perfect peace, not peace without cost, but peace nonetheless. The kind of peace that allows us to remember without reliving, to honour without repeating, to learn without being consumed. The Civil War is over. The battles are done. The soldiers rest. And America, wounded, scarred, transformed, lives on. Let your eyes close now. Let your breathing deepen and slow. The night is soft around you. The past is past. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own hopes. But tonight, in this quiet moment, there is only rest. The war has taught its lessons. The dead have spoken their truths. The nation has been tested and has endured. And now, at last, there is peace. Sleep well. Dream gently. The story is told. The memory is preserved. And in the morning when you wake, the world will still be here, imperfect, beautiful, free.